It's been a great weekend. I hope that you've been having a great weekend too. This last night, I got to help. Well, I got to officiate the wedding of two of our people here in the church, and to go see them. I've got to watch them as these young 20-somethings kind of go into like their mid and late 20s now together, and they've grown in their relationship and in their faith together. They said, "Hey, we're going to get married. Would you do our wedding?" I said, "Yeah, absolutely. I would do that." And they said, "Okay, what about premarital counseling?" I said, "Let's do that. Yeah, for sure." By the way, if you're ever thinking about getting married, I have this theory that we should do premarital counseling. Because everybody kind of knows before they get engaged that they're going to get engaged at some point. At that point, just go sit down with the pastor and talk about stuff. If you're not familiar with premarital counseling or anything, what you do is you just talk about the big stuff that you should talk about before you marry somebody, before you commit your life to them. So things like finances, for instance. How many bank accounts are we going to have? One joint bank account or two or three? And if so, why? And who's responsible for bills? We talk about children. Do you want them? Do you not? If so, how many? How are we going to raise them? Are they going to go to public school or private school? Where do we want to live? Near our family? No, not that close to your mom and dad. All of that. You go through all of those things together in premarital counseling. And every time I lead one of these premarital counseling sessions, usually it's like 2 or 3, we end up at some point talking about this advice my mom gave me years and years ago. And it's this: the hardest part of loving someone is that you can't make them do what you want. Think about that. I wish I had come up with that advice, because that's genius. That's genius. The hardest part of loving somebody is that you can't make them do what you want. And you just have to accept that. Whether it's a spouse, a child, a parent, you can't make them do what you want. Now, you could fix their life if they would just do whatever you said, of course. You could totally make everything right in their life, they'd be rich and powerful and good looking, have a nice car and everything, if they would just do what you said. I mean, that's not your life, but you could fix their life. And most of the time when we do that, when we're trying to help people, when we're trying to help our loved ones and make them do stuff, we're coming at it from a good place. We're saying, "Hey, I want to help you get where you need to go." And often we're trying to warn them against things. We warn them against certain decisions they might make, whether it be a job or a move or a relationship. We try to warn them. You should stay away from that. You should stay away from this thing. Don't do that. And what do? They don't listen to us because they know better. I have a scar right here on my index finger that I look at from time to time, and I remember this exact kind of thing. I remember vividly when I got this scar. I was 4 years old, and I was sitting in our kitchen, and my mom was washing dishes. And at the time, we lived in this house where it had a gas stove. I don't know if you've ever had a gas stove or seen one, but they, for a 4-year-old boy, I mean, they're amazing. Because suddenly you have fire in the house. All you got to do is turn a knob and there's a fire. I thought and the fire was blue. So I didn't understand how this all worked. And in my little 4-year-old brain, I thought, well, it's blue. Maybe it's cold. And of course, my next thought is, I want to touch that. And my mom, washing dishes, kind of turns and sees me looking at that. And then I get up and I walk closer like I'm going to touch it. And my mom says, "What are you doing? What are you doing? Back up. Don't do that. Get over there." She goes, "It's hot. It'll burn you. Don't do that." Okay, so I go and I sit back down. My mom, a few minutes later, leaves to go do something in another part of the house, leaving me alone with the stove. And so I walk over to the stove, turn it on, get that little, and it turns on. I'm looking at that thing. I'm like, okay, make sure the coast is clear. And I'm going to put my little finger in that little fire. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen these stoves. They got a little grate that goes over the top of the flame. That's how you put the pot or the pan on there, and it sits there. So I'm going to put my finger, and my finger brushes up against that grate, and it burns me, gives me the scar. And I screamed so loud I could have woke up somebody on Neptune, man. It was so loud. I'm screaming bloody murder, and my mom comes running, and she sees me, and she's like, "Told you." Told you. And then she gave me a hug. Yeah. She warned me. She warned me, don't do it. And I still did it, because that's typically what we tend to do whenever somebody warns us. Today we're kicking off a series called Red Flags. And it's all about how God has provided warnings for us throughout history. All of humanity has been given warnings. You personally have been given warnings. And from time to time, we just say, nah, I'm going to do it anyways. And then we experience the natural conclusions of those, of ignoring those warnings, of those sins. And then God, in his mercy, rescues us. So this is all about moving from warning to rescue. But there are these red flags that get popped up, don't they? These red flags that God throws in front of us to warn us about things that would say, hey, this is bad for you. Don't do that. You should stay away from this or these people. You should do that. And we do what the 4-year-old Josh did, and we just do it anyways. But if God is warning us, we should ask the question, what is God warning us away from? Well, if you've been around church or you've ever looked into the Bible, you probably know what the answer is, right? God is warning us away from sin, by and large. But sin, it's this funny thing. It carries a lot of baggage with that term, that phrase carries a lot of baggage. Because some of us grew up around people who said chewing tobacco was a sin. Some of us, our grandmothers chewed tobacco. Not very clear, is it? Some of us, we grew up in churches or around Christians who said drinking alcohol is a sin. But there's a church right down the street where they use alcohol in their communion. Not as clear. So what you define as sin may be different than what somebody else would say. It may be a different definition that somebody else would use about sin. The question we got to ask, if God is warning us, is what is sin? If God is warning us, and God is trying to keep us from harm, keep us from danger, what is sin? Because it might be different than what you think or I think. 2,000 years ago, one of the early Christian leaders was a guy named Paul. And Paul was writing a letter to some Christian friends, and they were talking about different stuff within this letter. And he's talking about people who had fallen away from God, people who weren't doing what they were supposed to do, people who were sinners. These sinners. And he gave very specific ideas about what sinners did. Here's what he said. They have become filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, greed, and depravity. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, and malice. They are gossips, slanderers, God-haters, insolent, arrogant, and boastful. They invent ways of doing evil. They disobey their parents. That's my favorite part. They have no understanding, no fidelity or faithfulness, no love, no mercy. That paints a rough picture of somebody, doesn't it? This is what sinners do. This is how sinners act. This is what they're after, right? I used to read that part about disobeying the parents and kind of laugh to myself, it's right there with murder. Sure, disobeying your parents is the same as murdering, yeah. But now that I'm a parent, he's absolutely right. He's absolutely right, this guy. It is the same as murder. This is what sinners do. He said, this is where all this wickedness comes from. This is what's happening. Now, it's important for us to understand that word there that he uses when he says wicked. It's important for us to latch onto that, because right before he lists out all of these things, he says these people that he's about to list all the specifics about are full of wickedness, full of evil, full of godlessness, which helps us to understand what he says just a few verses prior when he says this. The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and, there's that word, wickedness of people who suppress the truth by their wickedness. So he's saying all these people who are wicked, they are going to do these specific types of things. Murder, greed, envy, they don't obey their parents, gossip, malice, strife, all of that. They're doing those things. That's who's being talked about here, the ones who do these things. And God is saying, or Paul is saying that God is now pouring out his wrath is revealing his wrath on those people who do those things. Now, when we talk about wrath, we need to understand what we mean by wrath, because often the picture that gets conjured up is of God just losing his marbles and deciding that he's going to be mad at everybody and break stuff. Now, when you hear that word wrath, it brings to mind somebody who's just finally had enough and explodes. That's not how God acts, though. That's not what God does. When we talk about wrath, what we mean is, at least what Paul means and what you will find meant throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament, wrath is God allowing people who don't belong to God, who have not committed themselves to God, who don't believe in him, to experience the natural consequences of their sin. That's what wrath is, allowing people to experience the natural consequences of their sin. Well, that makes perfect sense, right? When I don't do things God's way, things aren't going to work out well. You've probably experienced that in your life. Not like God was punishing you, but it was just a natural consequence in your life. Like you were going 95 miles an hour down the road and you got a speeding ticket. Well, God didn't do that to you. You did that to you. That's the natural consequence of your sin. But it does beg the question, doesn't it? How can I be held responsible for something? How can I be held responsible for something if I don't know that it's a sin? Like we all, let's tell the truth, we all do kind of want people to get their comeuppance, don't we? Like we all kind of want them to experience the natural consequences of their sin. We don't want it for us, but we want it for other people. Like when we see that person driving 95 miles an hour down I-4, don't you secretly go, get him, copper? Don't you secretly kind of want that? But what about those who don't know? Right? Who don't know it's what sin is. They don't believe in God, or maybe they've never heard of Jesus. They've never even read about the Bible. Or maybe their example of Jesus has just been a very, very poor one, or a distorted image of who Jesus is. Like, what about those people? Are they held accountable? Are they held responsible for all of this? Well, Paul would say yes. He anticipates this question. And here's why. He says this, since what may be known about God is plain to them because God has made it plain to them. He says, this is plain stuff and God has made it plain. So it's clear. And here's why. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, those are his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen. Now pause there at that comma for a second with me. Right. Notice what he's doing. He's saying there are these invisible qualities that God has. And they are that God is eternal and that God is divine. God is God. God can do whatever God wants to do. God is holy. That's these things that we think about the divine, that God is good. Paul is saying that all of this can be clearly seen from the creation of the world. He's using an oxymoron to do that. What seems invisible is actually clearly seen. Kind of like when you say, I can see that you love them. Well, you can't physically see that. You can't prove it, but you can see it. It's invisible, but you can see it. It's the same idea when Paul writes this. And the reason he says you can understand is it's being understood from what has been made or created so that people are without excuse. So Paul's argument is that people are without excuse, that they should be committing themselves to God. They should know about God, and they should ultimately know what God values because of creation and logic. Because of creation and logic, that they should look at the world and understand that there is a God, a creator, who is eternal. Well, we've talked about this before in some weeks past. Right? Matter is created, and anything that is created has to be begun. And in order for something to be begun, someone has to begin it. And whoever is beginning it has to be eternal if we're talking about creation. They have to exist beyond a beginning. And someone who is eternal has no end and no beginning. So Paul says just looking at creation should show you that there is a God, not to mention all the animals and the microbes and the things and the intricacies of all of those things. They all point to a creator. I mean, have you ever seen a zebra? I was watching one of these things on National Geographic the other day, looking at a zebra. I'm like, how did those stripes just appear out of nowhere? It's beautiful. It's wonderful. Have you ever dissected a frog or something? Have you ever peered into the night sky? Have you ever even just looked under a microscope at like a germ or something like that? They show clearly that there's a creator, intricately designed, infinitely brilliant. Paul says all of this points to a creator, and if that wasn't enough, use your logic. If you want to know what God values, use your logic. If there is a creator, and we just said there was, then the creation will have something from that creator rubbed off on them. Like your parents. Whether you have a good relationship or a poor relationship with your parents, they have probably definitely rubbed off on you in some way. Whether it's when you look in the mirror or the way you respond in certain situations, the food you like to eat, the music you like to listen to, all of this has kind of rubbed, the talents you have, it's probably rubbed off on you somewhere along the way. The same is true for creation. When we look at the world, we understand that murder is bad. The world is set up in such a way that murder is bad. And it's logical, right? It doesn't make sense for us to murder. We can't exist in a society or with other people around if people are just willy-nilly out there killing folks. Mercy, kindness. We understand that when we show those and when those are natural things in our society, life gets better. When those are prevalent in our society, when mercy, kindness, and goodness are prevalent in our society, life gets better for everyone, including you. And if that's true, then it seems that this world has been set up in such a way by a creator who exhibits mercy, kindness, goodness, love, and joy, and peace, and patience, self-control. Paul says all of this is obvious and true, and nobody has an excuse. And so now he wants to talk just for a moment about what sin really is. This is where we boil it down to what sin really is. For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him. But their thinking became futile, and their foolish hearts were darkened. This is ultimately the consequence of ignoring or rejecting God. Ultimately, this is what happens when you ignore or reject God. Your heart is darkened. You move away because you move the light of your universe out of the center of your life. You move the light over here, say, I don't need you, I don't want you, I'm turning away from you, and your heart becomes darkened. It becomes easier and easier to walk towards the darkness and away from the light unless something happens. So what becomes apparent in the midst of all of this? What we need to understand essentially is that sin is ignoring or rejecting God in the world God created. Ignoring or rejecting God in the world that God created. That, back to our first question, what is sin? Is ignoring or rejecting God in the world that God created. Now you might say, well, I don't reject God. Maybe there was a time, and there are people in the world who do reject God, say, God, you are not going to tell me what to do. I'm going to hold on to my personal autonomy. A lot of us are like that. We will live our lives in that way. Nobody's going to tell me. Often, though, what many people do is they just ignore God, especially those who sit in pews on Sundays. I'm going to ignore what God has said here. I'm going to ignore that God has told me to take care of the poor. I'm going to ignore that God has told me to feed the hungry. I'm going to ignore that God has told me to stop being a gossip. I'm going to ignore that God has said this, and this. I'm going to ignore that this God exists and is ultimately one day going to judge me accordingly when I stand before him. I'm going to ignore all of that. And I'm going to do what I want and hope God is okay with it. I have this friend some years ago. We were in our 20s, and she was this really great person and a committed believer. But she was also really lonely. And so she was looking for a relationship. And one day she tells us that she started dating this guy. And we all ended up meeting him after they'd been dating a month or something like that. And right away, you could tell this guy, get away from this guy. Get away from this guy. And a few of our friends had the guts to tell her, like, you don't need to be dating that guy. Like that, she was a believer, he wasn't. She was really into church, he was not. Like, she was good and kind and wonderful, he was not. But she wanted this relationship so badly, any relationship, but she wanted this relationship so badly. She was willing to just ignore everything she had been taught, everything that she held true, or in essence, ignored God so that she could have that relationship. And she was ultimately left with a bunch of heartache. See, that's what happens. When we ignore or reject God, we take him out of the center of our lives, and we open ourselves up to heartache and heartbreak. We open ourselves up to something not good. Friends, you've heard me say this a million times if you've been here very much. Following Jesus is the best way to live and will make you better at life. That's what this is all about. It doesn't mean that your life suddenly gets rainbows and unicorns everywhere. It doesn't mean the air suddenly smells like roses and lilacs everywhere you go. It doesn't mean that you're rich. It doesn't mean you can suddenly find gold dust on places or that you deserve an airplane. It means that no matter what comes in your life, you're able to walk through it because God is with you. It means that no matter how people talk to you, you are able to treat them with grace because God's been working on you and doing something in you. It means that you make better decisions because they're grounded in Jesus, that he's the center. And here's the truth. Life cannot flourish when the Creator is removed from the center. And what we find out about Jesus is that it's in him, by him, and through him, all things were made. Nothing was made apart from him. Jesus has to be at the center. Now, if Jesus is at the center, things get better. See, in spite of all the warnings and in spite of us walking right past those red flags, God sends a rescue. I don't know if you're like me, I watch the hurricanes roll in, all the coverage. I like to watch all that happening. And when we know that the hurricane is coming in, don't they always come in overnight? Is that just me? They come in overnight when it's dark, and I'm watching the news coverage as long as I can. Inevitably, they've been warning people for days. Here comes this hurricane. Don't go out there. Don't do this. Just stay in your home or evacuate, right? And you'll see somebody down in Miami or somewhere else, and they've decided, bro, there's an awesome swell coming. I'm going surfing. And while I can identify with that, it seems kind of awesome. Like, you've been warned, like the water's about to get really, really treacherous. What are you doing? And then inevitably that guy ends up like a mile from shore. They're having to send people out after him, and this rescue team. That's what God does with us. God sends Jesus to rescue us. We make him the king of our life, and he rescues us. We follow him with everything we got. He rescues us from that darkness that we would otherwise be in. He rescues us from an eternity apart from God. But he also rescues us from the darkness of that life could be apart from God. My prayer for you is that you'll put Jesus back in the center of your life in every moment of every day. Don't ignore God. Don't reject God. Embrace him. Would you pray with me for just a moment? God, I thank you. I thank you that you rescued us. That while I was still far from you, you did what it took. While I was still wandering from you and thinking I knew better than you, you did what it took to rescue me. That I didn't earn it, I didn't deserve it in any way, but you just said, put me at the center. So God, this morning I ask that you would help us to turn our eyes fully upon you. To turn ourselves fully to make you the king of our life. And if there's anyone here who needs to do that, Lord, I pray that you'd help them make that decision right now. To not put it off, but to say, no, today is the day. Here now, January 11th, 2016, 2026, I'm making the commitment to follow you with everything I got. We thank you for your sacrifice. We ask God, help us to live lives worthy of it. Amen.